Georgia and this is The Sound of Georgia. Well, now it's June, so we're done with talking about Lerner and Lowe, but we're not done talking about Julie. They've decided to make a remake of 10. So it's come to this. Hollywood is so out of ideas that we need to start remaking Blake Edwards films from the 1970s. So for those who don't know, 10 was a movie that came out in 1979 that Julie made with her husband Blake Edwards. It was the third of the 7 films she would make with him and is the first of what I like to call Blake's biopics. That's when I'm being nice. When I'm not being nice, I call them the bad Blake movies. These 4 movies that I am talking about are, in order of release, 10, S.O.B., The Man Who Loved Women, and That's Life. And the reason I call them Blake's biopics is because they're all exactly the same. Like a YA high fantasy book. Spoilers for all of these. But we have our male protagonist who's going through some sort of midlife crisis. It always takes place on the beach, and there's always girls with no clothing. 3 out of the 4 times Julie is essentially playing herself, and 3 out of 4 times we have family cameos. Now I want to give these movies the benefit of the doubt and say there's some underlying genius about them, but then sometimes movies are just movies. And honestly, these aren't ones I really like all that much, just because of the type of movie it is. S.O.B. it's a bit clearer to see the message that it's going for than some of the others. It's a send-up and a satire of the Hollywood industry, as well as a piece of metafiction for Darling Lily. But Darling Lily turns 50 this year, so I'm sure I'll talk about that specific thing more in the Today in Julie Andrews History video I'm going to make. So sometimes movies can be hidden gems with lots of depth and meaning to them, but sometimes they can also be just movies. I'm not saying 10 doesn't have a deep, meaningful truth somewhere in there, but if it does, I have yet to find it. And I guess the reason I started talking about it the way I did is because I'm kind of surprised that this is the movie they've decided to remake. I'll leave a link to the article where I first read about this, but in it Julie says she's very protective of the films of Blake's that they would reimagine. But I really didn't think 10 would be the one they'd go for. It's not completely unknown, but I would have said Breakfast at Tiffany's and the Pink Panther movies were more well known than it, and the films that get remakes seem to be incredibly popular and successful movies, rather than the not so successful ones. So the ones that probably could benefit from remakes a bit more. So by that logic I've probably said 10 deserves a remake more than Breakfast at Tiffany's and the Pink Panther movies. But I wouldn't have thought that was the direction Hollywood would have gone in. So let's talk about 10 as a film. The premise for the movie is that we follow our leading male, George, who's played by Dudley Moore, who is a Hollywood composer going through, as I said at the beginning, a midlife crisis. And one day he's just driving around and he sees this woman on the way to her wedding in the car next to him. And apparently that was actually the inspiration for the film. Blake was driving around one day and saw this woman in the car next to him on the way to her wedding. Anyway, back to George. After that, he kind of ends up getting a bit obsessed with her, and in the end he follows her. Sounds a bit more creepy when I say it like that than it actually is. Just a bit. He follows her to Mexico, where she's having her honeymoon, where a whole lot of really bizarre stuff happens that I won't tell you here, because we should have some mystery before he goes back home to be with Julie. The reason the movie's called 10 is because this woman that George gets obsessed with is a 10. She's a 10 out of 10 in terms of beauty. In the article it said the movie made $75 million at the box office. I don't know whether that number's been adjusted for inflation or if it was $75 million back in 1979, in which case I don't know how big it would have been today. And just like every other Julie-related property from way back when that we keep dragging up, she's involved. She's going to be an executive producer. Honestly, the best way I can describe how I feel about this remake happening is interesting. Out of all the movies Blake Edwards made, it would not have been the one I would pick them to remake. But at the same time, the more successful a movie is, the less it should warrant a remake, I think. But as I established 2 sentences ago, This movie was not a flop by any means. It's not Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's big, but it's not nothing. Now, as far as I'm aware, the film will be modern. It won't be set in the 70s like the original movie was, because the original movie was set in the 70s because it was filmed in the 70s. So the movie will, as far as I'm aware, take place in today's era. And like it says in the article, looking at what would be a perfect 10 in today's society could be a really interesting idea. Honestly, I feel like it's gonna kind of be like Parent Trap. For those of you who have only seen one of the two Parent Trap movies, the premise is exactly the same. The plot is exactly the same. Some of the dialogue is almost exactly the same. But some of the little details here are different. For example, in the original Hayley Mills versions, the twins' names are Sharon and Susan, while in the 1998 version with Lindsay Lohan, the twins are named Hallie and Annie. So while the story virtually changes nothing, the names and little details like that of the characters are indeed different. And I have a feeling that's what it's going to be with 10. I wouldn't be surprised if our leading man is not called George. Even if the plot's very much the same, I would not be surprised if none of the names are. What I know there won't be, Bo Derek's cultural appropriation cornrow hairdo. Because it is cultural appropriation, Bo Derek's character is obviously the 10 we are talking about. And as far as I know, she was the big reason the movie stuck in the minds of most people. It says on the back of the DVD I have here, quote, "For many, 10's hottest star still remains Derek, whom George rates as at least 12. That's how hot she is. Moviegoers rated her a wow, and 10 launched her as the first big sex star of the 80s. Take that for what you will. I don't know anything else she did." So, will I end up going to see this movie? Yes, I think I will. 10 is far from my favourite film Julie ever made, though it is probably towards the top of the bad Blake movies that I mentioned earlier. But I think this movie will be really, really interesting to see. But this topic still has the word remake in the title. And to that end, I have the same reaction I do anytime I hear the word remake. Which is, really? Can't Hollywood think of something original for once? Nope, let's get a sequel to this. Let's remake this. Let's turn this into a musical. Let's turn this musical that was originally a film into a movie. Yeah, Mean Girls is doing that. And like I said at the beginning of this video, I want there to be some deep and meaningful point that 10 was trying to make. And I think you could definitely argue that there is. After all, he becomes infatuated with this woman simply after seeing her. And that is a very interesting thing to look at. But when I think about these movies, my thoughts usually are, yeah, that's sort of mindless entertainment. The people doing it also did Legally Blonde and The House Bunny and 10 Things I Hate About You. And I love, love, love Legally Blonde. I love the musical a lot more, but I do really like Legally Blonde. 10 Things I Hate About You I think I've seen once, but particularly House Bunny, I would just call that mindless entertainment. Chick flick. I enjoyed it well enough, but I wouldn't call it anything special. So I guess given my thoughts on 10, it would seem that these guys are the perfect people to do the remake. I'm very, very interested, but seriously Hollywood, another remake? Anyway, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you'd heard about this plan, and what are your thoughts on it? Have you seen 10? Did you enjoy it? And do you think there's some deep and meaningful truth in it that I'm completely missing? Let me know. Stay safe, guys. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my video next week. So long for now.